What is up everyone, welcome back to Mainly Movies, the channel where we talk about, well, mainly movies. So welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be reviewing 28 Years Later. After the mainland is quarantined off due to the virus which began 20 years earlier, a small island is inhabited by survivors who have learned to live peacefully. When a young boy named Spike learns of a doctor on the mainland who could treat his mother, he ventures into dangerous territory full of infected, hoping to find the answer to what is causing his mother's affliction. After all these years, we've finally got a sequel to the 28 Years trilogy, or whatever they wanted to call it. The 28 Years franchise. Originally it was going to be called 28 Months Later, but then the production dragged on for a very long time. It's nearly been 28 years since the first movie, so obviously it was more appropriate to call the film 28 Years Later. I wasn't extremely hyped for this movie. It wasn't my most anticipated of the year or anything, but I was generally curious and somewhat excited to see what they were going to do with this movie. And to quickly sum it up, it's a pretty good sequel. I honestly think it's better than 28 Weeks. I don't know if I would go as far to say it's better than 28 Days Later, because I like how simple that film is, but it's quite close. It still keeps a very simple plot, but kind of expands the world a little bit and gives us a little bit more as to how this world has changed all these years later. But anyway, let's start off with the positives. Visually, I actually really liked this film. It's very consistent to 28 Days Later. If you watch 28 Days and 28 Years Later back to back, the style feels like it hasn't changed at all, which I like consistency when I watch sequels. If the sequel actually feels like the original in terms of its style and all that, it's easier to kind of watch the entire franchise. Now, it's been a very long time since I've seen 28 Weeks Later, so I don't remember too much of the style, whether it was consistent with 28 Days Later, but from what I remember, it still had that quick cut, very energetic style, and this movie definitely keeps that. So this entire movie was shot using iPhone 15 or iPhone 14 or something like that, and at first I kind of thought that that was going to be a bit of a gimmick, like product placement or something like that. But then when you watch the movie, the use of iPhones is actually kind of a brilliant idea. Now, I mentioned in my YouTube short, my first impressions of 28 Years Later, that the use of the iPhone kind of gives off the same style as those old digital cameras that they use in 28 Days Later. Although in that movie, there's less quality, but it kind of adds a bit of grittiness, a bit of intensity to the shots because it's so low quality. And this movie kind of does the same thing with the iPhone, although you can get some really nice, vibrant, colorful shots with these phones. It's the frame rate, it's kind of jittery and a little bit flickering, and that to me kind of creates this disturbing illusion, especially when there's things that are happening really fast and there's quick edits. Frame rate kind of helps add this intensity to the whole situation. So visually, I think this movie is really good. There's one sequence, it's quite experimental, and I'll get to some of that stuff in a minute, but there's one shot where Aaron Taylor-Johnson's character and the kid are walking along this water, and there's just this like beautiful shot of the stars and all that. It's quite stylized and a little bit unrealistic, but it's beautiful. So I actually appreciate the visuals a lot more, which was the one thing I was a bit skeptical about going into this film, knowing that it was going to be completely shot with iPhones, which many movies have done before and they have worked, some haven't. But in the case for this film, it definitely does work. And it doesn't really take away anything visually. There's never a shot in this film that I could point out that I'm like, this is an awful shot, you shouldn't have used iPhone for this. The entire movie looks quite nice. Also, I really like the way the characters are written. Every character has a motivation, there's a nice drama to all the characters, and just the actual journey that the characters go on feels rewarding and pays off quite nicely. The movie never makes any rash decisions with its characters. The characters never make any choices that are just baffling, which a lot of things are doing nowadays, especially with TV shows. And so this movie also sets up like a little community that are living in the apocalypse. It sounds very similar to The Last of Us, right? Except this actually does it better. It doesn't really focus too much on the community at all. It just kind of focuses on this family who live within this community. We never really meet any other characters, which I really like. It's more of a character-focused film. And then you watch something like The Last of Us Season 2, where they have this giant battle and this siege on Jackson, and then they never do anything with it. It's like, why even bother putting it in there? And that's actually kind of where I thought this movie was going, until it became a bit more focused on the kid and his mother and his father as well. And then I realized, no, they're not going to have like a siege or anything like that. That's what I immediately thought was going to happen because they set up that there's this community living in the apocalypse. My mind is just so used to the Last of Us show that I thought something like that was going to happen. Thankfully, it didn't, and the journey that we go on throughout this film feels much more special and better than the way I expected the movie to play out. Now, I don't have any strong negatives about the film. I do feel, however, that some of the experimental choices that Danny Boyle incorporated in this film, some of them worked for me, some of them didn't. Like, the movie will often cut to movie footage or archive war footage that kind of mirrors what the characters are doing in the scene. And for me, whenever a filmmaker does that, just kind of randomly, it feels a little bit jarring. Also, there are these pretty cool shots where whenever like a character uses a bow and arrow and the arrow hits a zombie, the camera will freeze frame, but then it'll rotate to another position. And it was really cool until about halfway through the movie, until every time a zombie gets shot with an arrow, they use that technique, and it kind of becomes a little bit overused towards the ending of the film. But it's still a really cool effect, and I do appreciate that it's there. It's just after a while it kind of got a little bit overused. But it's better than just like a boring typical shoot a zombie and it falls down and that's it. You actually kind of have this unique camera movement that makes these kills memorable. And for the most part, the action sequences were directed very well. Now, Danny Boyle, for me, I've never been a massive fan of his films. I like Trainspotting and I like 28 Days Later. Slumdog Millionaire is a pretty good movie as well, but everything else to me has kind of been hit or miss. To me, he has this style that I can only kind of compare it to punk rock, and for his earlier films it works, but for this film it kind of becomes a little bit jarring at times. It's quite hard to explain exactly what I'm talking about, but if you ever watch like a punk music video or just see anything kind of punk related, this kind of has the style of that. The original movie did have that, but not as much as this film. This movie will often use like some very unique music choices that kind of either adds intensity. Sometimes I feel like the music is a little bit of an odd choice, and sometimes it works, but everything feels very old, late 90s, early 2000s, gritty, jump cuts, very excessive editing, which works because it stays consistent to the franchise, but at times it kind of gets a little bit jarring, especially towards later on where the movie becomes a little bit more patient and slows down a bit, which I like. I think the movie takes a very good direction in the second half. The first half I actually wasn't a big fan of, but then the second half I started to enjoy the movie a lot more when it slows down and becomes a little bit more patient, making it a little bit more character focused. But then when these big action sequences happen and it feels like a punk rock music video again, it kind of becomes a little bit of a shock sometimes. But at the same time, I appreciate that they do it because it stays consistent with the other films. So overall, I don't think it's a bad movie at all. I think it just makes some experimental choices that do work and some that don't. It has a very nice, simple plot, and for a part one, it actually wraps up the plot, which I really like. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger or anything. I mean, it does have something at the end that kind of leads on to what could be in the next film, but the main story and the central plot of the film actually does wrap up and feels like it has a start, middle, and end. And it's not like Dune Part 1 and 2 where part 1 ends on a cliffhanger or ends directly in the middle of the story. You can watch 28 Years Later as a film by itself and don't even need to watch the sequel, and it still feels like a movie that holds on its own. So I really appreciate that. But visually it has that excessive, very nice early 2000s quick cut action sequences with some unique visuals, some disturbing visuals as well. There's like these infrared shots where it's like zombies in a forest drenched in this like red filter, and it looks very disturbing. And overall, it's written very well. So it's time for my final rating. I'm going to give 28 Years Later a 3.5 stars. I think it does really well. It's a serviceable film. It just makes some decisions that I'm not a massive fan of and takes some risks that I'm not a big fan of, but I appreciate that it takes those risks and doesn't just become a typical zombie film. Anyway guys, thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. So stay tuned, I'll see you guys next time.